Well, this past Sunday we continued our story of Joseph, the son of Jacob, which the story is recorded in the last part of the book of Genesis, beginning with the 37th chapter. The title of the sermon was In Season and Out of Season. The title was taken from 2 Timothy 4 in the middle of verse 2, where Timothy is told to be ready in season and out of season. Joseph was ready in season and out of season. And by in season, out of season, we're talking about the times in which he was in the pit and the prison. That's one kind of season. The times he was at the peak and at the pinnacle, that's another kind of season. He went from pit to peak and prison to pinnacle, and in the end he delivered his people. We also live lives that go through seasons that are difficult, seasons of adversity, trying seasons. Perhaps this is one of them. And then we go through seasons which are joyous and happy. And we are also to be ready in season and out of season. Now, what this meant for Joseph is something to think about, because you see, as we've been following the story, we know that his brother Judah, among his other brothers, wanted to kill him, except for Reuben. And Reuben spoke up and then disappeared. And Judah spoke up when he noticed a caravan coming through, and he said, well, why don't we sell him as a slave? So if you're Joseph in the pit overhearing this, it's got to be hurtful. And so to be ready in season and out of season means to be ready to save your brother Judah, even though he hurt you. It's hard to help people who have hurt you. This is to the extreme swallowing your pride. If you're going to save the person, deliver the person, do something helpful to the person that has deeply hurt you, setting out to murder you and changing their mind to sell you as a slave, then that's difficult. It's hard to swallow your pride when you've been hurt by someone. So how does Joseph do it? Well, we see a hint of Joseph's character in Genesis 37, beginning with verse 13. The Christian Standard Bible says Israel. Now that's Joseph's daddy's other name. Joseph's daddy's name is Jacob, but God gave him a new name, Israel. He's referred to by that name here. It's referring to the individual, the father of Joseph. And so his father said to him, Israel said to Joseph, your brothers, are pasturing the flocks at Shechem. Get ready. I'm sending you to them. And Joseph said, I'm ready. Then Israel said to him, go and see how your brothers and the flocks are doing and bring word back to me. So he sent him from the Hebron Valley, and he went to Shechem. That's about 60 miles on foot. A man, he's unnamed, found him there, wandering in the field. And he asked Joseph, what are you looking for? I'm looking for my brothers. Joseph said, can you tell me where they're pasturing their flocks? Well, they've moved on from here. The man said, I heard him say, let's go to Dothan. That's another 20 some odd miles. And so Joseph set out after his brothers and found them at Dothan. Now, this is only a hint of his character. But the hint that we see of his character here is related to his obedience to his father. For you see, his father sent him out to check on his brothers who've been teasing him, giving him a difficult time, and not just once, I'm sure. If he was anywhere half-hearted about this, 60 miles on foot, not finding them, wandering around in the field, 9 out of 10 people would have said, I'm going back home. But his character is such that that's not the case. Joseph really is ready. When his father says to him, I want you to go check on your brothers, he says, I'm ready. Literally, that's here am I. And that's kind of an important phrase in the Old Testament. Abraham, in the 22nd chapter of Genesis, after he's waited all those years for the promise to be filled that he would have a child that God would bless the nations with through his barren wife, finally, after having the child, Abraham's faith is so developed by this time, when God says to him in the 22nd chapter, go and sacrifice him on this mountain, Abraham says, here I am I. I'm ready. Moses said it in Exodus the 3rd chapter when God said to him, go back to the land of Egypt where you fled because they have pursued you there and you've become the enemy of Pharaoh. Go back and save the Israelites, deliver them out of bondage and slavery. Moses, who seems rather powerless against anything like Pharaoh and the armies of Egypt, says, here am I. Samuel hears the call of God in the night and he says, here am I. And of course, most famously, Isaiah in the 6th chapter when God calls him to be a prophet. And God says, whom will I send and who will go for us? Isaiah says, here am I. Well, Joseph is ready. And Joseph's character is such that he travels 60 miles and then 20 miles. And then when we move to the 39th chapter, a couple of chapters later in the book of Genesis, we see Joseph's character lived out on two fronts in Genesis 39, where Joseph did everything right when tempted, and he got everything he did not deserve. He did everything right, and he got everything that he did not deserve, and that was prison time. He did everything right, but he went to jail as if he did everything wrong. Now, there's some possible responses when something like that happens to a person. The one we most often see is that the person reacts and blames someone. Many times it's not even the person that's responsible. In the case of Joseph, I'm sure that he could have blamed his brothers. He could have blamed Judah. But God sent him to save Judah especially. If you think about it, the story of Joseph taking up all of those chapters that end the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, you would expect that that would be a setup to hear a whole lot about Joseph from then on in book after book and periodically through the Old Testament and perhaps even in the Old Testament. You would think he would, that was just an indication. Chapters 37 through 50 being such a bulky section in such an important book of the Bible, you think that would have been an indication that Joseph is going to become very prominent in the Bible. But we do not hear very much about Joseph after the 50th chapter of Genesis. Really, the story is a story about the saving of the Israelites through Joseph. And in particular, the most important character in that saving is his brother Judah. One of the indications of this is the 39th chapter, which is exclusively about Judah, and it's right in the middle of the chapter. And the other indication is that we understand that this is the story of Jacob's family. That's the way it's introduced in the 37th chapter. The reason Judah is so important is through the line of Judah that we get David. And through the line of David we get Jesus. And so if Joseph had reacted by blaming and taking revenge on Judah, the opposite of what was needed would have happened. In many cases, when we have been hurt, and God wants us to be a part of delivering those who have hurt us, forgiving those who have hurt us, in many cases, the very opposite of what God wants to happen will happen if we're not ready in the season of forgiveness. The other possibility, other than blame, is to be loyal to God's plan. The other possibility is loyalty. Now, loyalty, a good biblical word for loyalty, is faithfulness. Joseph is faithful to the dream. And as we move into the 39th chapter in the story there, we discover that Joseph is tempted. Satan takes up a strategy against Joseph, and his first approach is flattery, and his second approach is constant pressure. His final ambush, where all is lost or won in a moment, Potiphar's wife, who is tempting Joseph, catches him by his coat and says, "Come to bed with me." But he does everything right. To the flattery, there's refusal. "No one is greater in this house than I. My master has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How then could I do such a wicked thing and sin against God?" You see the loyalty there? Here, the loyalty is to Potiphar. The story about him going out and checking on his brothers, the loyalty is loyalty to his father. So in both cases, we see that Joseph's character is displayed through loyalty. He did everything right. In response to her constant pressure, there was avoidance. And though she spoke to Joseph day after day, he refused to go to bed with her or even be with her. But he continues to do everything right. When it comes to that moment in which all is won or all is lost, and she grabs him by the coat, he leaves the coat in her hand and runs out of the house. His response is flight. He did everything right, but he went to jail as if he did everything wrong. We see the next words of the story beginning in the 19th verse of the 39th chapter. In the Christian Standard Bible, it says, "When his master heard the story, his wife told him, 'These are the things your slave did to me.'" She's holding the coat up. "He was furious." Her husband was furious and had him thrown into prison where the king's prisoners were confined. And so Joseph was there in prison, but the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him. He granted him favor with the prison warden. The warden put all the prisoners who were in the prison under Joseph's authority, and he was responsible for everything that was done there. The warden did not bother with anything under Joseph's authority because the Lord was with Joseph, and the Lord made everything that he did successful. Now, things turn out pretty good for Joseph as he goes to prison as we look at the story. But even if you are the top of the heap in prison, things can only be so good. And it was a long term. He spent 13 years in captivity in the servant quarters and in the prison house. And it was a total of 22 years before he was back with his father, Jacob, and there was any even beginning of reconciliation with his family. All that he had lost after 22 years just begun to come back together again. That's a lot of hurt. 13 years as a slave and a prisoner. 9 more years before reconciliation. 22 years of waiting. And yet Joseph doesn't lash out at prisoners and prison wardens. He doesn't lash out at Potiphar or Potiphar's wife, or he doesn't lash out when he gets the chance at Pharaoh. He doesn't lash out at God. He remains loyal, faithful to the plan of God. The secret of resistance to temptation, the secret to victory over trial, is not simply exerting effort, resisting and avoiding. The secret of resistance to temptation and trial is not lashing out at whoever gets in the way. What does doing the right thing look like? Well, for Joseph, it meant being loyal to his papa, loyal to Potiphar, loyal, later we'll see in the story, to Pharaoh, but most of all, loyal to God's plan. Joseph was sold out to the long game. He was willing to go through what he went through in the short game, difficulty after difficulty, because he knew that in the end, God would bring about his own way. And he knew that it was going to be very important because of the dreams that he himself had had, those dreams that we've read about in the 37th chapter of Genesis. We see this being sold out to the long game in Joseph's loyalties. And this is how he lives out the dream. Loyal to seeing the dream through to its end. The victory comes in my life as I am loyal to a plan that outlasts what I am facing at any given moment. And the hardest thing that I ever do in life is accept mistreatment. To decide to ignore what I feel like doing right now when things aren't going well, because I am loyal to a plan that outlasts what I am facing right now. This plan that Joseph is sold out to is God's plan to save a people alive. That's what we find at the very end of the book of Genesis as the story of Joseph concludes in Genesis, the 50th chapter, verse 20. Joseph says to his brothers, "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive." And so Joseph's influence is intact as we come to the end of his story. And the same thing will be true for us. As we face hardship, difficulty, trials, and temptations, if we keep our vision focused on God's end game, God's end plan for us, we'll live out a life in such a way that our influence will stay intact. We'll remain loyal to that plan, and those around us will get glimpses of a witness to God and what God is about, and the love of God for them and the whole world, and the plan of God to save all peoples.